World of Warfare presents Maximum Effort for the 15th Air Force. By July of 1944, the 15th Air Force, flying out of 21 air bases in southern Italy, had at last achieved its authorized fighter strength of 3 Lightning groups and 4 Mustang groups, which continued to be maintained through VE Day. America's overwhelming warplane production rate and aircrew pilot training output had both reached levels of critical mass, which allowed Allied air leaders to step up the frequency and volume of raids on Axis targets to a level air leaders referred to as maximum effort. But with increased air activity came increased losses, and by the end of the month, July proved to be the costliest month ever for the 15th, losing 265 heavy bombers and 68 fighters, a bloodbath which followed the devastating losses of June, when the 15th lost 168 heavy bombers and 80 fighters. In the win column, 15th air crews rated Ploesti 5 times, with increasingly accurate and debilitating results. By midsummer of 1944, Hitler had lost faith in the Luftwaffe's ability to protect German cities, citizens, and armament factories. After the Reich had consolidated aircraft production underground, warplane production numbers went up, while the fuel needed to keep them aloft went down at a precipitous rate. Pilot training hours continued to be shortened, leaving fresh pilots woefully unprepared for combat. Pitted against high-trained American airmen flying superior fighter planes, the remains of a once dominant Luftwaffe appeared destined for total collapse. Nonetheless, the unsung airmen of the 15th continued to pay a heavy toll without fanfare back home, since the 8th Air Force flying out of air bases in Great Britain had long been the darling of journalists stationed in the relative safety of London. The 15th's status as stepchild back home led to the creation of a ditty sung to the tune of As Time Goes By. It's still the same old story. The 8th gets all the glory, while we go out to die. The fundamental things apply as flak goes by. On July 2nd, Waist Gunner Harry B. Taylor of the 454th Bomb Group experienced a near-death accident that he would remember quite understandably for the remainder of his life. After bombs away over the Shell oil refinery near Budapest, Hungary, Taylor's pilot, James R. Robinette, was forced to take evasive action when a new and inexperienced pilot in his formation came dangerously close to colliding with his wing. As the plane pitched violently to the left, Taylor lost his balance. Thanks to his lightning-fast reflexes, he grabbed the top window rail as his body dangled feet first outside the plane, 4 miles up without a parachute. Taylor hung on for dear life until Robinette oversteered the plane to the right, pitching him back inside the fuselage where he could drop down onto the deck. The next day, 15th Commander General Nathan F. Twining unleashed 600 bombers on petroleum and transport targets at Budapest, Romania, as well as an oil storage facility near Belgrade in present-day Serbia. 21-year-old Robert J. Goebel of the 31st Fighter Group was one of 250 fighters dispatched that day to protect the Big France, which is what fighter pilots called an Allied heavy bomber. When one of Goebel's 4-plane flights announced multiple inbound bogies over the radio, Goebel ordered his flight to drop their wing tanks in advance of the fight. He quickly spotted 15 Me-109s at 20,000 feet, close to his position. I think their leader saw my flight at about the same time, he recalled. He had balls, I'll say that for him. The 2 109s started down to attack the bombers below, or the 4 of us. It was a rash act indeed. Entering a loop, the German leader broke off from his 3 partners, prompting Goebel and his wingman to follow the looping plane, while 2 others in his flight split in the opposite direction with the hope of bracketing the enemy. Whichever way the German pilot broke, he would be boxed in by American fighter planes. Still out of range, Goebel lined up on the 109 and squeezed his trigger. The German maneuvered hard, pushing the nose of his plane downward in a nearly impossible -G drop. I remember being puzzled and frustrated at my inability to hit him with a solid burst, Goebel recalled. He then firewalled his throttle in an effort to close the gap, but the German evaded his every move. Once his plane had closed to within 1,000 feet of the enemy, Goebel tweaked his controls until his aiming dot lined up on the tail of the enemy plane. I fired again and was rewarded with strikes around the fuselage and wing roots. Then his prop wash threw me off him momentarily. A second clean hit did in the 109, and as the German pilot bailed out, Goebel toggled his armament switch over to camera and sight position, tracking the German before capturing an image as proof of his kill. He then flew by the descending German, waving a chivalrous hand before rejoining his flight. History will not allow for perfect certainty on the matter, but Bob Goebel most likely shot down the world's third-ranking fighter ace at the time, 22-year-old Erich Hartmann. Known as the Black Devil of the Ukraine, his 2+ years of combat experience had already credited him with 260 kills, mostly against Soviet pilots. In a 1970 biography, Hartmann claimed that he was forced to jump when his plane ran out of fuel, and once his chute had opened, a Mustang flew past him, allowing Hartmann to glimpse a gloved hand raised in salute. Hartmann survived his shoot-down to return to combat, closing out the war with 352 credited victories, the highest number of kills in aerial combat history. On July 7th of 1944, Twining sent 550 bombers on raids over Blechhammer and Odertal, Germany, as well as transport targets in Yugoslavia. The 15th lost 25 liberators, 7 over Blechhammer, but one of the most incredible acts of flying occurred not over enemy territory, but back on the Foggia plain of Italy. Flying Calamity Jane back to their Castelluccio air base, Frank McQuaid of the 451st Bomb Group experienced a recurring fuel feed problem that shut down his number 2 and 3 engines, when each respective fuel pressure gauge showed 0 fuel remaining. A mile from the runway, McQuaid ordered his crew to assume their crash positions. Slipping down through 1,500 feet, McQuaid radioed the tower about his situation, gaining immediate approval for a straight-in landing. After the tower waved off a heavy bomber on final approach, McQuaid kept his wheels and flaps up to reduce drag and extend his glide path, coaxing what little power he had left in his 2 remaining engines to help him bleed off speed. With nail-biter precision, McQuaid dropped his wheels and flaps at the last possible moment, rolling down the runway between 2 B-24s that had just landed. Once they had been towed to their hard stand, Calamity Jane's crew chief discovered 15 gallons remaining for the 1 operational left engine and only 10 gallons for the right. Group CO Colonel Robert Eaton said that not even a movie star aviator could accomplish McQuaid's feat. On July the 8th of 1944, the 82nd Fighter Group scored their second highest single-mission victory against Axis fighters, topped only by the performance on April 11th of 1943. Flight leaders were Charles Adam of the 95th Fighter Squadron, Charles Pinson of the 96th, and Robert Griffith of the 97th. When the flight spotted an abundance of Me-400s climbing to altitude, Pinson gave the order for a pincer maneuver. The 95th attacked from the left, the 96th from the right, while the 97th provided top cover from the rear. The resulting aerial massacre credited 19 destroyed, 1 probable, and 3 damaged. By the time the Soviets invaded Romania, slightly less than 60,000 American airmen had dropped 13,000 tons of bombs on the oil refineries at Ploesti, and on July the 9th of 1944, the 98th Bomb Group brought the fight back to Romania for yet another trouncing. The mission incorporated a Mickey ship technique developed by the 8th Air Force, which allowed for a drop-on-lead bombardment approach for the 222 participating forts and libs assigned to the mission. While mission losses were light, Donald D. Puckett's plane was one of 6 heavy bombers that failed to make it home. Flying the mission in his 3rd month in theater, the 29-year-old Puckett was known for his competent judgment. Puckett's bombardier had barely called out bombs away when Puckett's B-24 was rocked by flak. The explosions killed the flight engineer and wounded 6 other crewmen, knocking out 2 engines, replete with a ruptured fuel line, severed flight control cables, and an oxygen-fed fire. Puckett immediately relinquished control to his co-pilot, Robert Jenkins, and made his way aft to assess the damage. Fuel and hydraulic fluid had pooled in the bomb bay, obliging him to hand crank open the doors in an effort to minimize the dangers of a catastrophic explosion. Next, he ordered his least injured crewmates to reduce the plane's weight by jettisoning loose equipment, ammo, and guns. Still losing altitude at an unsustainable rate, Puckett ordered a bailout of the 5 men well enough to jump. 3 airmen, however, were either too wounded or too reluctant to jump. Unwilling to leave his wounded men to certain death, Puckett retook the pilot's seat in an attempt to pull the Liberator out of her dive for an attempted controlled crash landing. Before Puckett could level out, however, his B-24 crashed into a mountain and exploded on impact, killing all aboard. For his sacrifice, Puckett was awarded the Medal of Honor, the 7th and final top medal awarded for missions to the Romanian refineries. He was also the 2nd airman awarded the Medal of Honor from the 98th Bomb Group, after Commanding Officer John J.R. Killer Kane was awarded the first one during Operation Tidal Wave, August 1, 1943. Puckett's loyalty to his men lived on in his widow Lorene's actions, who refused to attend her late husband's medal ceremony unless the description of hysterical crewmen was removed from the citation. The statement, she maintained, made for a poor reflection for the men who lost their lives on a Balkan mountainside. Don's action in staying with his wounded crew members and crippled lib, she explained, was what was traditional and expected of the captain of the ship. On a July 12th mission to bomb the marshalling yards at Nîmes, France, Robert Swansea's Liberator flew in the number 2 position of the lead formation sent up by the 465th Bomb Group. 4 Me-109s attacked the formation, killing Swansea instantly when 20mm cannon fire hit him in the face. The cannon fire also knocked out the autopilot and intercom, forcing fill-in co-pilot William A. Nelson to issue the bailout order over the Durance River near Pertry, France. 9 of the 11 crew successfully bailed out, while ball turret gunner Loopy Montana could not get out of the plane before the B-24 struck the ground. Swansea and Montana were buried by French civilians in the town of La Tour d'Aigle on Bastille Day, July 14th of 1944. Nose gunner Thomas W. Walsh learned from French underground fighters that the burial was attended by nearly everyone in the village. The surviving airmen were quickly swept up by French resistance fighters, spending the next month assisting the underground in distributing supplies dropped by Allied Special Operations units, intended to resupply and support partisan fighters in their attempts to sabotage occupying Axis forces. The men returned to their Bari air base in late August of 1944. On the same mission to southern France, the Tuskegee Airmen of the 332nd Fighter Group provided escort cover to their big friends. On the run-up to the target, 25 German fighters bounced the Tuskegee Airmen as they approached the French coast, setting off a raging dogfight which pitted P-51s against FW-190s. Flight leader Joseph Ellsbury gave chase to a FW-190 after the German made a firing pass on the bomber stream. Turning into the enemy fighter, Aylesbury lined up a 30-degree deflection shot that struck the German's motor and wing root. Thick black smoke trailed from the 190 as it fell off to the left. Almost immediately, Aylesbury locked into another Fokker-Wulf that turned below his Mustang. Aylesbury rolled into another 30-degree dive, giving a short burst until bits of the enemy's left wing flew off the plane. Aylesbury performed a split S maneuver, chasing the doomed enemy earthward until the plane slammed into the ground. Climbing back up to rejoin his flight, Aylesbury caught a third FW-190 on the run, downing the plane with a 2-second burst from his machine guns. Once again, Aylesbury attempted to rejoin his group until he crossed paths with yet another FW-190, descending in a 45-degree dive. Aylesbury rolled right and followed the enemy down, firing his left wing guns as he gave his Mustang hard right rudder to keep the enemy in his sight. He scored hits on the enemy's left wing root. In response, the 190 spiraled down toward Earth, slamming into the ground before the pilot could bail out. Aylesbury finished the mission with 3 kills and a probable. On July 16, 1944, the Checkertail clan went on a sweep to Vienna, where they ran into a large formation of German fighters. While the majority of the Messerschmitts escaped into cloud cover, Robert Black, Ernest Beverly, and Bruce Cobb bounced approximately 15 to 20 enemy aircraft. Black claimed 2 kills, while Beverly and Cobb were each credited with 1. 3 Me-110s also went down without shots fired when Stanley DeGreer, Horace Self Jr., and Edwin R. Williams bounced the twin-engine fighters. Panicked by the diving approach of faster, more nimble Mustangs, the center pilot rolled his plane in an effort to make a run for the deck. Instead, he collided with both his wingmen, sending all 3 planes earthward for a fiery communal end. His wingtips struck those airplanes, and all 3 crashed together, Williams recalled. The air was filled with motors, wings, and tails. On July 18th of 1944, the 15th flew missions to Friedrichshafen, Germany, bombing airdromes, oil refineries, and armament factories. The Checkertails and the Redtails from the 325th and 332nd Fighter Groups, respectively, escorted 112 B-17s, although the Checkertails were mistakenly recalled before the bomber stream reached Memmingen, Germany. That left 58 fighters from the Tuskegee Airmen, who tangled with 30 Me-109s over northern Italy. 21 pilots dropped their wing tanks prior to engagement, then tore into the 109s with punishing results. 9 enemy fighters went down in the dogfight, although the 332nd lost one of its own when it was struck by a falling wing tank. I saw a formation of 109s straight ahead, and I closed to about 200 feet and started firing, recalled then 20-year-old Clarence Lucky Lester. Smoke began to pour from the aircraft, and a little later it exploded. I was going so fast, I was sure I would hit some of the debris, but luckily I didn't. As I was dodging pieces of the enemy aircraft, I saw another 109 to my right, all alone on a heading 90 degrees to mine, at the same altitude. I turned onto his tail and closed to about 200 feet while firing. I noticed the aircraft began to smoke and almost stopped. I was going so fast I overran him, but noticed a blonde pilot parachute from his burning plane. I was alone and looking for my flight mates, Lester continued, when I spotted a third Me-109 flying very low, about 1,000 feet above the ground. Lester dropped in on the enemy, fired his machine guns, and claimed his third victory of the day. While 21 fighters returned to Ramitelli Airfield after their dogfight with the Germans, the remaining 37 Tuskegee Airmen flew support for B-17s from the 2nd and 463rd Bomb Groups. Approaching the target, the 483rd Bomb Group was chopped to pieces by 127 German fighters. Fighting through odds severely stacked against them, the Tuskegee Airmen attacked the German fighters 2 by 2, while the 52nd Fighter Group, previously discharged from escort duty, turned back on their flight home to lend a hand in the fight. Awaiting the bomber stream near Friedrichshafen, the 1st Fighter Group also turned around to offer aid when they heard the tense voices of aerial combat over their radios. When they finally reached the bomber stream, they approached in horror as some 90 Me-109s cut into the formations. Most of the arriving fighter pilots witnessed a dozen fortresses fall from the sky before they could properly engage the enemy. In a 20-minute running air battle, 15th Fighters downed 24 Me-109s. I shot at least 8 of them, and 2 went down, recalled Flight Leader William H. Coughlin. All the Jerrys that I didn't get, my flight got. Every man in my flight got at least one enemy. The 3 heroic fighter groups engaged in the battle logged 40 kills against 5 losses. However, 15 heavy bombers were lost during the mission, 14 from the 483rd Bomb Group, making maximum effort for the 15th Air Force, one of the deadliest periods in the annals of World War II aviation.